I was talking earlier about playing chess. Now, I don't really actually physically play chess. Nothing against chess, it's just not my thing. To be honest with you, I don't even play checkers. But I got a great message on my channel from Rob Barrett, and he called to my attention this thing called pawn promotion, which is something that is built into the game of chess. And of course, the game of chess is the game of kings, the game of royalty, the game of the elite. Not saying that they're the only ones that play it, but it is their game. And it was certainly their game for a long, long, long time. And after Rob turned me on to this, I realized that there was very likely an encoding of a way to escape the matrix and our ability to escape the matrix encoded into, encrypted into the game of kings. I know it sounds crazy, ladies and gentlemen, but you are used to crazy around here. So I want to show you something. Well, I'm not even going to show it to you because it's not really that interesting to look at, but it's called pawn promotion, ladies and gentlemen. And what it means is that, and I'm just going to read it to you straight from the, you know what, let me show it to you anyway, just so you know I'm not making things up. It's kind of boring. It's not anything real exciting, but what happens when my pawn reaches the other side of the board? When a pawn reaches the opposite side of the board, it promotes. This means that the owner of the pawn can replace it with a queen, a rook, a knight, or a bishop, and put that piece instead of the pawn on the board on the square of the pawn. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're the red color here and you've got a pawn and it was right here and it's moved its way all the way over, like I guess this one right here, you're a white pawn, you move it to that end and you get to become a king, which I thought was fascinating. You can become either not a king, you can become a queen, a rook, a knight, or a bishop. And I'm going to go through each of those because it's very fascinating to me. But the beautiful thing that I see here is that even though we're born of low station, even though we don't have power, even though we don't have wealth, even though we don't have fame, even though we don't have any of the things that you would think you would need to raise yourself up to the level of the elites, we can do it. We can do it by fighting our way across their board, fighting our way across their game board, fighting our way across their minefield, fighting our way across, and that brings new meaning to my checkerboard, black and red behind me. Not only does it mean that I live in a place where I have neighbors that are close and I need to have soundproofing, not only does it mean that I need red and black, and of course that I'm a blood-drinking, reptilian, Illuminati soul sucker. Of course it means that because you've got red and black on your wall. Idiots. I see idiots. But anyway, I'm working my way across their board, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm not rich. I'm not famous. I don't got nothing. But I got the will. I got the desire. I got the drive. And I'm pushing my way across their game board because I'm going to get to the other side, ladies and gentlemen. I'm fighting my way across. I'm going to get to the other side. And when I get to the other side, I can become a queen. I can become a rook. I can become a bishop, or I can become a knight. What do all those things have in common? Well, knights are the entry level of, of royalty or nobility, right? Bishops, of course, have nobility because of their affiliation with the church. Rooks also nobility, and then a queen goes without saying. But let's take a look at each one of these pieces and think about that, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't matter if you are a pawn. Right now, you might be a lowly pawn in somebody else's chess game. And if you are, what I say to you is keep on fighting, keep on pushing, keep on pressing, keep on going, and don't get jumped. Because if you can fight your way through to the other side of the board, and you can become a rook, a bishop, a knight, or a queen. And it's up to you, ladies and gentlemen. And is this a dimensional lesson as well? Let's take a look at some things. Let's look at the knight within the game of chess. The knight is represented by an armored cavalry. It is representing an armored cavalry, a knight, a horse with armor on it. It's normally represented by the horse's head and neck. Each player starts with 2 knights, which begin on the row closest to the player between the rooks and bishops, which is interesting. But in any way, we don't call it a horse, really. We don't. It's really called a knight. And listen to this. As far as the enemy pawns, let's see. Knights, ladies and gentlemen. Compared to a bishop, a knight is not as often as good in the end game. The knight's potential range of movement is more limited, which often makes it less suitable in end games with pawns on both sides of the board. But a knight has a better chance against a queen than 2 bishops or a bishop and a knight. You see all the implications and all the things you can read into this? A knight has a better chance than 2 bishops against a queen. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? But compared to a bishop, a knight is often not as good. Knights are superior to bishops in an end game if all the pawns are on one side of the board. Knights have the advantage of being able to control squares of either color, unlike a lone bishop. But a disadvantage of the knight is that it by itself cannot lose a move to put the opponent in some kind of a chess term. But very, very interesting, ladies and gentlemen. A knight can be superior to a bishop. A knight can be a powerful piece on the chessboard. So I'm sure there's deeper things in here that I'm not able to know because I don't play chess, but it's interesting that you could choose to be a knight. You could choose to be a member of the armored cavalry, and it might even have some superiority to being a bishop. You can turn yourself from a pawn into a knight, ladies and gentlemen. What about a bishop? What about, let's do this. Comparison to other pieces. Let me see if we've got that for the rook or for the knight. We do not have that for the knight. Why not? The knight has the oldest defined movement of any chess piece, its movement being unchanged since the invention of the game in India around the 6th century. That's interesting because the knight is original. It's constant. Very, very interesting. Let's take a look now, if you will, at the rook. The rook is also known as the tower, the marquise, the rector. It is the piece that looks, of course, like the castle, turret. And let's think about the relative value. In general, rooks are stronger than bishops or knights. Let's go back to knights and see if it gave their relative value. Here we go, value. Here we go. How did I miss this? Let's go back to the knight. The knight is approximately equal in strength and value to a bishop. The bishop has longer range, but it's restricted only to half the squares on the board. Since the knight can jump over pieces which obstruct other pieces, it's usually more valuable when the board is more crowded. A knight is best when it has support point or outpost, a relatively sheltered square where it can be positioned and exert its strength remotely. A knight is comparable to a bishop. Interesting. So depending upon, after you've fought your way across the board, where you want to be and which dimensionality you're operating from, the knight is equal in strength to a bishop. But if it's more crowded, so maybe in this world, it's better to be a knight. I find this fascinating. You might find it whatever you find it, but I think it's fascinating. The relative value, in general, rooks are stronger than bishops or knights. Okay, so rooks are stronger than bishops or knights. but has less valuable than two other minor pieces approximately. Anyway, rooks are stronger than bishops or knights. That's interesting. Rooks and queens are called heavy pieces as opposed to bishops and knights, which are called minor pieces. That's interesting. That's interesting. And a rook, interestingly enough, is kind of emblematic of a siege tower. They would build a siege next to a wall, climb up their siege tower and breach the wall. So the rook is kind of like a long-term end-game kind of thing. Interesting. Rooks are most powerful towards the end of a game. How about that? Because they can move unobstructed and control large numbers of squares. They're somewhat clumsy at restraining enemy pawns. Interesting. So they each have their relative worths. All right, now what if you wanted to be a bishop? Comparison to other pieces of the bishop. A rook is usually worth 2 pawns more than a bishop, which is interesting. The bishop has access to only half of the squares on the board because I know it has to stay on one color. In general, bishops are approximately equal to knights, but depending on the game situation, either may have a distinct advantage. Less experienced players tend to underrate the bishop compared to the knight because the knight can reach all squares. Bishops gain in relative strength towards the end game as more pieces are captured and more open lines become available in which they can operate. Interesting. Interesting. And then, of course, at the end, the queen is the most powerful piece in the game of chess. The queen is slightly stronger than a rook and a bishop together, while slightly less strong than 2 rooks. It's almost always disadvantageous to exchange the queen for a single piece other than the enemy's queen. Interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Interesting, ladies and gentlemen. So my question is, if you could become a queen, if you could become a bishop, if you could become a rook, if you could become a knight, why would you become anything other than a queen? Fascinating to me. However, the takeaway is that even though we begin as a pawn, even though you may be a pawn right now, ladies and gentlemen, if you keep fighting, if you keep pressing, if you keep pushing, and you advance your way across the board, you can become a armored cavalry, a knight. You can become a bishop. You can become a rook, or you can become a queen. You can become nobility. You can become royalty. And depending upon your desires, when you reach the end of the board, you can do any of these things. I don't know why that caught my attention. I don't know why that fascinated me so. Maybe it means absolutely nothing to you, and I've just wasted however many minutes of your life this has been, though I don't think so. Lessons from the game of kings, encrypted within the game of kings, the fact that we can escape and we can ascend and we can become divine and sovereign and free. You'll never look at my chessboard behind me the same again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is New Cosmic Knowledge. We are playing a game. We are playing a game to win, and we're going to get across that board, and we're going to become nobility. We're going to become royalty. We're going to become ascended masters of our own domain. We're going to become divine. We're going to become sovereign. We're going to become free. And yes, I'm talking about you and me. Stay tuned for more podcast excellence. Let's get busy, ladies and gentlemen. We are the last generation of real humans. Let's get free. Let's get across this board and let's get busy.